All right. Hey, everybody. Um, I went on a little early just to kind of check some stuff. I haven't done a live stream on YouTube in forever, and the layout and everything is significantly different than when I did it several years ago. So I'm hoping to kind of hop on a couple minutes here before anybody else gets in, and I can sort of get some levels and stuff. I don't have a way to set my mic gain. So I'm hoping that somebody will pop in. I announced it for 8:30, so I get it that nobody's here yet. But somebody could hop in and let me know if they can hear it. I do not hear it in my headphones. I'm going to do a hand clap and see if it registers on the meter. No, it did not. Okay. So I may not have any audio. That would be a bummer. That'd be a massive bummer. Let's see here. Man, this is way different, and it wouldn't let me set up much ahead of time. I'm not using OBS. I know OBS can do all this stuff, but my computer can't handle it. So if you're interested in helping that little snag, I do have Patreon and Venmo that are linked. I don't really push it, but just do the best I can with what I have. Yeah, I don't know. This is probably going to end up getting canceled and tried again later, which is a shame because I'm all excited to talk about this topic. Yeah, but there's no way for me to. Let me try something else here. Okay. So my system says that I've got good. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. And I'm trying out an actual webcam tonight, other than my phone. So I'm seeing with the 1080 resolution here, as opposed to the whatever it is on my old iPhone 7, that the lighting is not anywhere near what I had hoped it would be. So I might just end up redoing this later. On the bright side, I do have, I upgraded my internet at home and went off of DSL Plus or whatever it was. We are on AT&T home internet, so hopefully I did a speed test and it was significantly faster. So I'm looking forward to being able to do some live streams from home like that, being able to do some live interviews with folks. I've had people reach out to me for those and have had to decline for now because I don't want to get into a stream or an interview and then have my connection drop out and ruin it. So, um, hoping to be able to do some of that. Yeah, I do not have a way to set the gain up on this mic. There's nothing on the mic itself. Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, there's nothing. All right, well, hmm. Let's see what this pop-out dashboard does. Maybe that'll give me some settings. Okay. Oh, this is nice. It tells me that my signal is excellent. I like that. That's good. It does not give me any audio settings. That's disappointing. Okay. Yeah, this is just massive bummer. Well, let's try something else. Since Brave Browser is using my microphone, let's see if Brave Browser has any settings. It does not. Okay. That's fine. All right, so it's 8:30. It's the official start time. I just saw somebody pop on. I'm not sure who it is. If you wouldn't mind letting me know if you can hear my audio. And just in case you can't, I'm going to type that into the chat. I'm thinking it's probably inaudible, which is a bummer. I used to use this camera all the time when I would do these at home. If you go over to my old James Reidner YouTube channel, there's all these old videos, like way back to the COVID era, maybe a little bit before, and really low quality sound, video, that whole bit. I'm using a much better laptop this go around I did back then. Same webcam though, so I'm hoping that the webcam, I think, is fine. It's spec'd out fine. I'm just, for whatever reason, I don't think it's getting audio into YouTube here. Let's make sure I don't have this set up on slow. I don't think I do, because I want to see the responses in real time. No, I don't think I have it on slow. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm here. Perfect. Awesome. Woo! Hallelujah. That's a huge relief. I can't hear with these headphones on anyway, so I'm just gonna take them off. So they're not doing me any good. I'm just gonna take them off and be comfortable. Anyway, actually, yeah, I actually can. That's weird. Barely. I'll leave them on. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Cool. All right. So I have audio, so this is worth doing. As long as I don't cover myself in shadow with my abysmal lighting here. All right. So we're off and running. So if this is the first time you have tuned in to any of these live streams, because I have, based on the stats, I think I have different audiences on the YouTube channel versus my Facebook account. There's some overlap, but I think that it's 100% overlap. So if this is your first time tuning into a live stream, what I typically do, my name is James Reidner. What I typically do is I just kind of, I call these truck talks. I'm a professional truck driver. I'm sitting in a Freightliner Cascadia right now, parked for the night. And what I come on to do is I try to talk about things that are that are on my mind scripturally. Sometimes I talk about current events, things like that. But I always try to have some kind of a foundation where everything kind of goes back to the scriptures in some way. Um, so what I wanted to do with this live stream, Passover's coming up, and my family is observing it starting this coming Friday night. We're calling it the 14th day of the month, starting this coming Friday night, tomorrow night. So Saturday, the weekly Sabbath day, that day would be Passover, and then going into that night, we would start the 15th day of the month, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we're planning on having a high day service because if you're not familiar with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first and last days, day 1 and day 7, are considered high Sabbaths, and you are to have a holy convocation and take a rest on those days the same way you would a weekly Sabbath. So that's our plan. I'm super excited, and I want to just to kind of leading up to that, just come on and talk about a couple of related misconceptions about Passover. And then, assuming that that part goes well and the technology end of this doesn't interfere, I'm going to open the floor for anybody that wants to ask a question about Passover in the chat. So when we get to that point, I just ask that you please keep it to actual legit questions, not trolling, and that we don't get like confrontational, like, oh, why are you keeping Passover? No, 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 that kind of stuff. Like, no, let's keep this educational. Let's keep it friendly. So anyway, so Passover, misconception one, and this is, like I said, they're both connected. Misconception one is that what's the best way to say this? Oh, you watched my videos before. Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully they're beneficial. So misconception one is the idea, and we get this, there's a bunch of different ways to get to it. Option number one, the law, the Torah itself has been completely done away with at Calvary. So therefore, everything associated with that, except for the moral law, which who can really define that, right? Because morality is a sliding scale. Anyway, whatever the ambiguous moral law is, everything else was done away with at Calvary. That includes Passover. Now, the other way to look at it is well, 1 Corinthians 5 says that Messiah, Christ, is our Passover. So therefore, based on that, we don't need to actually do Passover anymore. And in my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth. I've been keeping Passover since 2005. And just to give some background, I was born and raised in the conservative end of the Church of Christ. I'm in my early 40s, so most of my adult life has been spent keeping Yahweh's holy days in some capacity. And of course, with anything else, as you learn, you grow, you make mistakes, you hopefully learn from those mistakes. And one of the things that I've learned about Passover is that, like all of Yahweh's holy days, they have a setup. We can go in and we can see in the Older Testament where the origins are. We can see where we're told Israel's people, or Yahweh's people, Israel, are told to observe these holy days. We see words like perpetually, throughout your generations, forever, consistently associated with these observances. And so the idea that the Torah itself was done away with, and therefore all these feasts are negated, that's bogus, because we see the same language associated with it. We see in Matthew chapter 5, not one jot or tittle will pass away from the Torah, the law, until all has been fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, my word will not. Heaven and earth are still here. So by his own words, and we see this in book of Acts, we see it in Paul's epistles, the idea that the feasts are constantly. And so that's kind of a funny thing to do if they were done away with at Calvary. Why would you keep referring back to, oh, well, we set sail after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I think that's in Acts 20. Therefore, let us keep the feast. Which feast? Passover. He just mentioned that in 1 Corinthians 5. Paul's telling us to keep Passover. Why is all this information relevant to Gentile churches who were never, prior to this point, keeping the Torah? Because they're Gentiles, they're not Israel. Why would they? Why would pagans in Rome be interested in keeping the Torah? Why would they be interested in Passover? So why is Paul mentioning all this stuff in his epistles as if they understand these concepts? Somebody would have been teaching them about these concepts Otherwise, it's irrelevant for him to bring them up, just logically. So the Torah in and of itself, there's no setup. There's no setup that says, hey, I'm putting in these commandments for Israel, my people. By the way, a few thousand years from now, the Messiah is going to come and do certain things. One of those is die, be buried, and resurrected. And when that happens, I'm going to change the definition of who my people are away from the Jews or Israel collectively, because it's not just Judah, it's all 12 tribes. I'm going to change my definition of my people from that over to the Gentiles, who have never been my people unless they graft into Israel per Romans 11. Paul understood this. And so the idea that all these Gentiles know these things, again, is evidence that the law itself was not done away with at Calvary. And, coupled in with that, the feast days, the holy days, were not done away with at Calvary. We don't see a setup for that. We don't see a setup that says, okay, so Passover, you kill the lamb on the 14th day of the first month, the month of Abib, and the destroyer passes over. I want you to do this as a memorial for all your generations and all your dwelling places, until a certain point where the spiritual thing that the lamb points to, aka Messiah, comes. Then you stop doing this physical thing that points to that. Colossians 2, these are the shadows that Paul talks about, which interestingly, he says it in the present tense. These are shadows of good things to come. In Colossians 2, he's saying present tense from the time he wrote that. How many years after Calvary? He doesn't go back in time and say these things were shadows of things to come, and those things came at Calvary. So you have all this language in the New Testament that strongly implies that Paul and the other apostles were keeping Yahweh's holy days. Because I think that they understood the same thing that I and so many others see, that there's no setup. There's no setup for the idea that, when the physical thing is pointing towards a spiritual thing, when the spiritual thing happens, you stop doing the physical thing. There's just no setup for that. And I use this as an example all the time. Christians are fond of saying, well, Jesus is my Sabbath rest. It's like, okay, I understand what you're saying. I understand the concept, and I agree with the concept. But here's the thing. Have you ever endeavored to actually keep Sabbath? Now, Paul Ingalls on TV, they were doing it on Sunday. Okay, cool. I disagree with the timing, obviously, because it's always the seventh day of the week in the scriptures. But let's just say on principle, they were taking the 1 day in 7 and they were resting. Okay, they were honoring the Sabbath by doing Sabbath things on the first day of the week. Let's just go with that. Has anybody around done that? Does anybody do that anymore? I know the Amish and Mennonites do. Do any of the people that say Jesus is my Sabbath rest, can they actually point to their own experience and say, I know what it's like to keep the Sabbath because I do it in the physical? So when I put an equal sign between Jesus and the Sabbath, I have an actual understanding of what that means, other than just intellectual head knowledge or things my pastor told me, right? We learn by doing. We know that that's a principle just in life in general. Why would we say our faith is any different? Why would we say that, oh, we know all these things about the Messiah, and we know that these things pointed to the Messiah, but we don't do those things? It's like saying, well, what's the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is to lead me to Christ. Well, did it lead you to Christ? No. No Christian out there can say that the law, the Torah, Yahweh's commandments led them to Christ, even though they say that's what its purpose is. And if you backtrack that into history, okay, well, look at the Hebrews. Look at Israel. Look at the Jews. Did it lead them to Christ? No. The apostles, you start with Peter in Acts 2. He's not saying like, well, the law, which we've been keeping all these hundreds of years, has got us to a point to where now we don't have to keep the law anymore because Christ came. No. He's preaching Christ came. The Messiah just came, guys, and guess what just happened? You guys missed it. But guess what? You can still get on board. You can still repent. of your sins and be baptized and believe, you can still do that. You can still accept him as the Messiah, even though a few days ago, 50 days ago ish, he was crucified. That's the point. And you don't see any of the apostles going out and saying, hey, guess what? All my Jewish brethren, like they don't ever get in trouble for saying, hey, let's stop doing the law. That would have been a big deal. You think about the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers. They were always trying to trip the Messiah up and get him on these little things. If Peter's out there openly saying, hey, we don't have to keep the Torah anymore, it's kind of a big deal. But that's not what they're getting in trouble for. They're getting thrown in prison for saying Yahshua or Yeshua. We should follow him and accept him as the. So I think they understood. Nothing's changing. It's changing structurally about the covenantal relationship between Yahweh and his people. The only thing that changed at that point is that the Messiah came. And so to say that the Messiah came, he's our Passover lamb, which I agree. Passover as a principle, as a concept, points directly and squarely to him. Just because that's the case doesn't mean we stop doing Passover. Otherwise, Paul would have said, therefore, let us study about the Passover. Let us talk about the Passover. Let us listen to my awesome sermon on the Passover. I'm going to explain all the deep spiritual meaning of this feast that you guys have never kept because you're Gentiles. And why would you? Because after Calvary, not even the Jews have to keep it. Right? So that's misconception number one, is that the fact that the spiritual that Passover in the physical was pointing to happened, we no longer actually do Passover. There's no setup for that. And by extension, I would extrapolate that out, like I said earlier, to all Yahweh's commandments. My position has always been, if you can keep one of his commandments, if it's in your power, do it. If you cannot, ask yourself why. Is it because it's just always going to be impossible for me? I'm a man. There are commandments specifically geared towards women that I will never be able to keep no matter how long I want to. The book of Hebrews tells us that the Messiah couldn't keep the commandments pertaining to the Levites because he wasn't a Levite. He was from the tribe of Judah. So all those commandments that you read about the Levitical priesthood doing all their sacrifices and their priestly duties and all that stuff, he didn't do a single one. The only ones that he did were the ones that were relevant to him as a man from the tribe of Judah. Yes, he did sacrifices, but he wasn't the priest actually doing the sacrifices in the temple. That wasn't his job. He wasn't able to. And if he would have tried to keep those commandments, he would have been in sin. So there's no setup. There's just no setup. There's just no setup. So that's misconception number one, is that the whole plan all along was to stop doing Passover the moment Messiah died. That's wrong. It's wrong. Misconception number two is that now that he has died, now that he has risen, now that we have forgiveness by his blood, Revelation 12 says that the saints overcome the adversary, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Hallelujah. We know that's true. So with that being true, if I, in 2025, endeavor to keep Passover, I am denying the blood of the Lamb. I am denying the salvific awesomeness that happened at Calvary. I'm denying Yahshua or Yeshua or Jesus as my Savior. This is also false. Again, just like misconception number one, there's no setup for this. Because Paul is saying, because Messiah is the Passover, let's keep the Passover. And this is something that you see all through the scriptures. And I already kind of alluded to this with a couple of things like around Sabbath. When you do the thing, you learn the principles of doing the thing. So if I'm going into it as a Jew, okay, let's say I'm an unbelieving Jew, I'm Hasidic, okay, the typical stereotype, right? I'm an ultra-Orthodox Jew. I don't believe that he's the Messiah. I believe in the concept of Messiah. I believe that that concept will come. There will be a person coming to earth at some point in the future, and I will hail him as Mashiach. I believe that. But I don't believe that it was Yahshua of Nazareth. Okay? So if that person keeps Passover, are they commemorating Messiah? No, they're not. When they keep Passover, they're commemorating Exodus 12. They're commemorating the Exodus just like it says you're doing. That's the point of Passover, is to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. Right? It says it over and over again. That's what they're doing. Now, me coming into it as a believer in Messiah, that he came 2,000 years ago-ish, that he died at Calvary, and his blood forgives my sins. As a believer already, when I start to keep Passover, I'm not thinking, wow, this lamb that I'm about to eat, that was literally killed and literally shed its blood by somebody, either by, prior to the grocery store or in your backyard, or however it ends up coming to your table. The fact that that has happened means that Jesus is no longer the Messiah. His blood wasn't shed for me. I'm going to go and do Judaism. I have heard that so many times over the years. So you do Passover, James? So you eat the lamb, so you're denying Messiah? Like what? Like if I'm a believer to begin with, and I decide to do Bible things Bible ways, if I decide to actually do what's written in the book, and when I get into the New Testament and I see the Messiah doing the things written in the book, and I see him in those red letters telling me to follow him, does it make sense for me to do things differently than he did and say I'm following him? On Facebook a few days ago, I asked a question. If it comes along and undoes what Moses did, he's not like Moses, referring to the prophet like Moses back in Deuteronomy. In order to be a prophet like Moses, you have to be like Moses. So if the Messiah comes along and says, hey guys, my whole ministry is about upending the law, so like, guess what? I'm going to die tomorrow, and then after I'm dead and in the ground, or depending on how you reckon it, I've seen different theologians reckon it differently, either when he died, when he was resurrected, some wait all the way until his actual ascension on 40 days later. Either way you look at it in that general time frame, once this arbitrary date passes, you can have pork chops. You can, work on the Sabbath. You can do move your neighbor's boundary marker. Anything that you see in the Torah, you can go ahead and do that now. Like, again, there's no setup for that. And when you read the red letters, especially, there's no setup for that. We see him doing Passover. We see his disciples doing Passover. We actually have what's called the Quarto-Decuman controversy some years later, involving a gentleman named Polycarp. Polycarp, if you're not familiar with him, we have a few writings about him and supposedly by him, but the one about him describes a meeting where he went to Rome. And he's described as a follower of John the Apostle, the Apostle John. Polycarp was a disciple of his. When you're a disciple of somebody, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to learn what they teach you and follow them. Messiah's disciples were supposed to learn what he taught them and follow him. If it's done properly, it's like making copies in a copy machine. The original document's pristine. The second document, the copy, is pristine. The third is pristine. They all look identical if it's done properly. This is discipleship. Polycarp went to Rome to advocate for keeping Passover on the 14th day of the first month, not Easter. I forget the other gentleman's name in Rome that was advocating keeping Easter instead of Passover, because at the time you had this large influx of Gentiles into the church, And they were trying to basically adopt their customs and make it kind of centered around them, divorce it from its Hebrew roots. Polycarp's like, no, this is not how we're going to do it. Now, they basically agreed to disagree, but the fact that around 160 AD, or CE for you politically correct folks, right? Over 100 years after Calvary, you have a disciple of John who is advocating keeping the Passover on the 14th day of the first month as prescribed in the Torah. Why? Did he just not read Galatians? Did he not understand that all that stuff was for the Jews? It was like a national holiday, kind of like Hanukkah is today. Did he not understand that? Did he not understand that the law, including those Jewish feast days, was nailed to the cross? Polycarp was a Gentile. He wasn't even Jewish. So why is a Gentile disciple of John advocating keeping the Passover? Because he understood the same things that I see. And I'm no genius, but it's in the book. And if I read the book with an open mind and let the text speak for itself, it says what it says, and it means what it means. By keeping Passover, I'm not denying the blood of Messiah any more than Polycarp did. Polycarp died a painful, horrific martyr's death for his belief in the Messiah. And he advocated for keeping Passover. So, yes, it's one life, but it's a life that shows us that the two are not mutually exclusive. You're not losing your faith in Messiah the moment you keep Passover. The moment you decide, let me eat a physical lamb because the book says to, I'm denying the spiritual lamb. That doesn't have to be the reality. Now, maybe it is for people who reject the Messiah and go back into Judaism. There are people that do that. But for those of us that maintain our belief in Messiah, and I was having a conversation with someone the other day. Like I said, I've been keeping Passover since 2005, most of my adult life. And I will say until the day I die, every time I do Passover, I get a deeper, richer understanding of exactly what transpired at Calvary. My faith in the Messiah, the Lamb of Elohim, the Lamb of God that was slain before the foundations of the world. My faith in him deepens and grows every time I do Passover. When we do Passover with my children, I get to teach them those lessons. You know, like churches and Sunday school are all about finding visual aids, right? And schools in general, finding ways to tap in to your child's sensory learning needs, visually, audio, tactile, whatever, right? It's kind of hard to find a better way to teach about the blood of the Lamb than to immerse yourself in the Passover experience. And when I say the Passover experience, I'm just going to refer to a couple of videos on the TMM channel here. One is called, I've got a series I've started, The Fundamentals of Passover, the Fundamentals of Yahweh's Holy Days, Passover, where I just kind of break down the basics of Passover, pulling out what I can from the text and trying to not get too much into the traditions. And then I've got another one on unleavened bread that I did recently, obviously about unleavened bread, right? And so the idea, because they're connected, right? So the idea is that you can teach your children these deep spiritual principles, in my opinion, more effectively if you anchor it to something concrete that they can see in the same Bible. My kids can read about Moses in the Exodus, and then they can go over to the New Testament and read about the Messiah. They can see, because I teach them this, but they can see that he's the prophet like Moses. They can see in the book of John that no one comes to the Son unless the Father first draws him. Interesting. What does Moses' name mean? His name means drawn because he was drawn from the Nile. What did he do? He led Israel into the house underneath the blood. He actually led Israel literally, physically, tangibly underneath the blood of the Lamb. Interesting. When you connect the two concepts, you get a deeper, richer meaning. And so that's a misconception, that by doing Passover, you're somehow denying Messiah. Like I said, I guess it's possible, but the average person that you run into that's somewhere in this Hebrew roots, Messianic, Torah space, whatever you want to call us, whatever your label of choice is, those of us who believe in Yahshua or Yeshua of Nazareth as the Messiah and endeavor to do the things that are spelled out in the Older Testament, left of Matthew, those people are trying to harmonize both ends of the book. And we're seeing that so much hinges on the blood of the Lamb. I mentioned Revelation 12 earlier. They overcame him how? By the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. The longer we keep Passover, the more we do Passover, the more that experience becomes our testimony. And our testimony is more and more about the blood of the Lamb. You can have a testimony about the blood of the Lamb in the sense of, yes, my sins were washed away by it, I've been forgiven. But your testimony takes on a much deeper, richer meaning when you actually start to live Passover. And just like Sabbath, unless you actually endeavor to keep the Sabbath, you can say you understand the spiritual principles around Sabbath, and maybe you do on some level, but I guarantee you will never understand those spiritual principles as well as you would if you actually endeavored to observe the Sabbath. And I'll say the same thing with Passover. You will never fully understand the spiritual significance and meaning of Passover, try as you might, unless you actually endeavor to keep Passover. Now, it may sound radical, oh, I'm a Christian keeping Passover? What? Well, Easter's not in our Bibles. You have no problem keeping Easter. I kept Easter as a young man going into my early adult years. I had no problem keeping Easter, even though I couldn't find it anywhere in my Bible. That's not true. I was a King James only guy. It's in the book of Acts. Interestingly, when you look up that word in the Greek, it's Pascha, which is Passover. So the King James translators falsely translated the word for Passover as Easter. There was a word that they could have used and they didn't. So think of that what you will. But other than that, Easter's not in the scriptures. There's nowhere in the Bible that talks about the disciples, the apostles, Gentile converts, anybody. Nobody's keeping Easter in our scriptures. And yet here we are. We have all these people doing Passover and talking about Passover and teaching thematically from Passover. Paul's not going to Easter and saying, hey guys, hey Corinth, let's learn the lessons of Easter. He's not doing that. He's taking Gentiles back to the Torah, back to Exodus. And he's saying, hey, let me take this very important thing that happened in your history. I say your history because you've been grafted in. You're Israel now. Ephesians 2, you're no longer a Gentile. Now you're part of the Commonwealth. Now you're a citizen of Israel. You guys, this is your history now. Therefore, let us keep the feast, Passover. And I guarantee those Corinthians, by keeping Passover under Paul's leadership, put a seminary grad in a time machine and send them back. And I would almost guarantee that the average person in that fellowship in Corinth will have a better understanding of what happened at Calvary than a modern day seminary grad who never even endeavors to keep the Passover. So we're about 40 minutes here, including my little testing at the beginning. I'll go ahead and close it there. That's kind of basically it. Just the two main misconceptions I see, and they are connected. They're a little bit different, but those are the two main ones. So if you're on the fence about keeping Passover for any of those two reasons, hopefully that'll get you thinking, food for thought. If you know anybody personally that's kept the Passover or is keeping the Passover, I encourage you to talk to them. I'm sure they'd be happy to share with you about it. I know I am. I love Passover. It used to be early in my walk. You can't help it. You start keeping Yahweh's holy days, and just like with anything else, you end up with a favorite. For years, the Feast of Tabernacles was my favorite because you get to go camping. It's a lot of fun. I take a week plus off when I'm just hanging out with my family and friends. It's great. I'm in the outdoors. Love it. But over the past few years, that has shifted over to Passover. Passover is now my favorite holy day, my favorite of Yahweh's commanded observances, because just without the blood of the lamb, what is there? Camping in tents? I mean, yes, that throws back to the Exodus, to remember that you dwelt in booths while you were in the wilderness. Okay, but they weren't in the wilderness without first coming under the blood of the lamb. That's the starting gun for the whole Exodus experience, and it's kind of a reminder of the journey started under the blood of the lamb. All those 600,000, give or take men, grown men over 20, that left. Two, Joshua and Caleb, entered the promised land, not even Moses. So to me, it's kind of a reminder of just how serious it is. Yes, you can be covered in the blood of the lamb. You can be under that door in that house, but it's not a guarantee that your faith will lead you to your destination. So every time we do Passover, it's just a reminder, hey, check your faith, check your heart. You might think you're on track, maybe you're not. Guess what? You're human. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll see, check the chat here if I have any questions. I do have a question. Isn't Pascha the current Greek word for Easter? I believe it is, yeah. It's I haven't looked into like Greek Orthodox in a little bit, but I think you're right. I think if I was to go into a Greek Orthodox church and say Happy Easter, they would probably say Happy Pascha in Greek, like whatever that means. And I don't know if that's because they're going off of something with the translation. I don't know their history with that. But I do know that in the King James and the other English translations of the New Testament, that word Pascha in other instances gets. There's no reason to translate it as Easter. There's just not. And in modern times, if people are using the Greek word for Passover to describe Easter, it's kind of almost an acknowledgement in my mind. Like it's like in Spanish, what's the word for Saturday? Sábados, right? Isn't that kind of derivative from Sabbath? So aren't we kind of acknowledging that the seventh day of the week is the Sabbath? And yet so many people are not doing it. So it's like if you're Greek Orthodox and you're calling Easter Passover, if you're going to talk about Passover and use that language, why not take it the extra step and actually do what's in your Bible that's called Passover instead of doing this counterfeit, and calling it Passover? Because Easter, I mean, there are people that will take it as far as they can from its modern cultural issues, the Easter bunny and the eggs and all that stuff, right? There are people who will keep Easter and try to not engage in all that nonsense. They really do try to keep it about Christ. And I have a degree of respect for that. But in my opinion, if it's really all about Christ, why don't we do the things that are in the Bible? Like, why are we choosing, I don't have it here, obviously. If you can look me up on Facebook, my name James Reidner. I have a Facebook account. I post a lot. Okay, so I have shared videos on there. You can find them too. But I've shared videos over the years of witches, pagan witches, like real legit witches, talking about how they observe Easter and how cool it is that they get to have this thing in common with their Christian family. Why? Why would we want to take something like that and use it in the worship of our Creator, in the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why would we want to ignore the words of Paul and say, therefore, let us keep the feast, Passover, Why would we ignore that and do this counterfeit? I understand that people mean well generally, but meaning well doesn't necessarily mean ending well. Like good intentions don't amount for much when you're doing things that are wrong, you know? And ultimately, Yahweh is the judge of our hearts. He knows where we're coming from. He knows our motives. He knows what information we have to work with when we're making judgment calls on what we do. Okay? So if a person has no background in Passover, they literally have no information, they're brand new baby Christian, all they know is they have a King James Bible, it says Easter, that's it. Okay, Yahweh knows that. He's not a moron. But when you read deeper and you start to see what it actually says and you start to get that mileage, that time spent in the book, and you come to the realization that Easter's nowhere in the book, Passover is all over it, and you still cling to those ways, in my opinion, that's a problem. It just is. So I'm just going to look and see if there's any other questions in the live chat. This has been kind of fun. If this worked and if this turned out correctly, I'm considering doing this as my format going forward, because Facebook is deleting live streams after 30 days. So I have to go through, if I want to keep a live stream, if I thought it was a decent one, it turned out all right, I have to download it. I have to bring it into my editor, edit it, all that stuff, render it over to an MP4 file, et cetera, upload it to YouTube just to be able to save it. Okay, so that's tedious. I've been doing it, but it's a chore. And like I said, my poor little laptop is struggling. So if I can handle doing these live streams directly on YouTube instead, knowing that YouTube actually saves it and you can watch it again later, it saves me all of that stress. It saves me all of that time. So I'll watch this on the back end and see how it turned out. If you don't want to post your question publicly, feel free to message me. What is my email address? 3measuresministry@yahoo.com, I believe is that email. You can find me on Facebook. I have the 3 Measures Ministry Facebook as well as my personal. It's public. You can maybe DM me there or something. But anyway, or in the comments, because I know that for some people, you don't want to be seen. Oh, so and so. You're up at the church on Sunday, and the rumor mill's going around. Did you see so and so was watching that video? This weirdo truck talking about Passover, and they had questions about it. If you don't want to be that person, I get it. You can email me or direct message me. When Messiah died, was it both the Passover and the Day of Atonement all at once? That is a very insightful question. And I'm going to say yes. And let me explain. Thematically, okay? Thematically, Passover was never about the forgiveness of sins. You won't find anything associated with Passover connecting it with atonement or forgiveness of sins. Obviously, we have the Day of Atonement for that, right? We have, certain sacrifices under the sacrificial system involved in that as well, the sin offerings and things like that. But as far as a holy day goes, that's Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement. Now, if you think about it thematically, what happens on the Day of Atonement? You have the 2 goats, the one for Azazel or the scapegoat. The sins of the people are pronounced on him, and he's let go out in the wilderness. And then you've got the one for Yahweh that's actually killed. What do we see on Passover when Yahshua is killed? Right? We see 2. We see him and Barabbas. Barabbas released. Yahshua was killed. Thematically, very similar to Yom Kippur. Barabbas translates as something like son of the, right? Like, they're similar, but one is released and one is killed. So thematically, you can definitely connect the 2. And then, Hebrews talks about the veil being torn, these kinds of things. That connects it kind of back into, especially when he starts describing the insides of the tabernacle. Sometimes people will disregard the book of Hebrews because the order that he describes things in the book of Hebrews, as far as the tabernacle, like the altar of incense and that kind of stuff is in the wrong order. It's in the right order on Yom Kippur. So he's describing the high priest in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And he's connecting that back to the work that Messiah did at Calvary. So yes, it's very connected. And just on a calendrical point, I'm just going to put this out there into cyberspace in the hopes that somebody can connect this puzzle. So if you are new to keeping the feasts, if you haven't already, you will become aware that there are people keeping Passover on multiple days this year. That's because people interpret the calendar differently. And it's become a situation where it seems like almost every year there's a new calendar variant coming out. So our fellowship, my family and our fellowship here in Pennsylvania, the past couple or 3 years, we have gone off of the Hillel 2 or the Jewish calendar for functional reasons. Okay, my personal opinion on the calendar is that all of these biblical calendars that we have people doing, right? The barley calendar, the Jewish calendar, the conjunction calendar, the Zadok calendar, the Enoch calendar, name any biblical calendar, they all have places where they work. They all have places where they don't. None of them have anything in the canonized 66 books of the scriptures that spell out how to do that calendar. And even when you get into like Enoch and Jubilees and you try to do that calendar, we've got umpteen different variants on it because even that's vague. My personal thought is that if we could find some way, knowing that in the northern hemisphere in the spring, it's the fall in the southern hemisphere, if we could find a calendar that somehow had the Day of Atonement in one hemisphere falling on the same day as Passover in the other hemisphere, that way, like you're literally doing, someone in the world is doing Passover the same day as someone doing Yom Kippur. You know, like if that were possible, to me, that might be the key to solve the calendar thing. Maybe it's not possible. I don't know. I've been trying to sync that up for years and have failed utterly. So if someone else can do it, great. I would love to see that work. Maybe it doesn't work. I'm open to that too. It's just an idea, you know, because you're in the space long enough and the calendar just becomes this massive thorn in your side. The Way, if you've seen the Way documentary put out by Luke and Katie Abafi, they've got a podcast called The Life Podcast on YouTube. And they did a video, I think it was back in January. They got 4 guys together and they discussed the calendar. I think it was called the Calendar Event or something like that. If you're new to the subject and just kind of want to know more about the calendar, I'll recommend that as a resource. But you know, it's just 4 guys giving their opinions on the calendar and why they keep different calendars, you know, and there's really no conclusion of the video other than, hey, here's some information, do with it what you will. So anyway, same as this, here's some information about Passover, do with it what you will. You know, if you find fulfillment in Easter, I mean, finding fulfillment's better than not finding fulfillment, but I would guarantee, and I have no problem saying this, I will guarantee if you switch out Easter for Passover, you will find more fulfillment. You'll be like, I did Easter for this whole time? I mean, the chocolate bunnies were great, but wow, okay, I missed all of this. Yeah, you know, I wholeheartedly believe that that will be the case for anyone. Every single person I know that have switched over from holidays to holy days has had the same net effect on their faith. Their faith has grown. Their understanding of the deeper spiritual things of their faith has increased. Why? Because they're not just converting that into head knowledge, they're converting it into foot knowledge, knowledge that they can actually walk and do. And they can see their footsteps walked by other people in the scriptures. Not the church fathers, not the reformers. No, actually in the scriptures. That's massive. And you don't understand the weight of that until you actually do it. Scholarship only gets us so far. I'm just going to scan for, see if there's any more questions. I don't see any. So I will take a look when this is over at the outcome of this. Hopefully it turned out okay. Like I said, I'm doing the best I can on a trucker's budget with the technology here. If you'd like to help out with that, there are links to do so. I'm not 501c3, so you don't get a tax benefit. You know, you get my appreciation, and hopefully you get a blessing out of it. That's it. That's all I can offer. So no Patreon. YouTube is not monetized. None of that stuff. So, you know, it is what it is. I'm not going to go that route. I just don't. I don't want to turn into that guy. Anyway, so I'm going to call it quits. Thank you to the 3 of you who tuned in. I see comments from 2 people. I see 3 views. So you viewer number 3, even though you're completely anonymous, thank you for tuning in. As always, Yahweh bless.